In 1954, the French and the British government shared a vision. Together, they were plotting to revolutionize civilian air travel. They wanted to develop the first civilian airliner capable of transporting passengers at a tempo greater than the speed of sound. The famous supersonic aircraft carrier, known under the name Concorde. And the entire project failed spectacularly. Within years, the project already went over budget, and the costs just kept escalating and escalating. Originally estimated to cost around £70 million, the project soon had costed hundreds of millions, and yet no one pulled the plug. By 1976, the year the first commercial flight took place, the cost was estimated to be above 1.5 billion. To make matters even worse, only 27 years after its initial takeoff, the air carriers were already retired following a terrible crash. The entire project ended up burning millions of dollars and never got even close to turning a profit. So, why do I bring up Britain and France failed supersonic aircraft carrier in a video about Mario Kart World? One might ask. Well, because the Concorde project was actually such a commercial failure that curious psychologists and clever economists soon after began to wonder how something like this was possible in the first place. Why was no one stopping the escalating costs? And the result of their investigation? Well, the result of their investigation was that probably no one had stopped the project from going further over budget because it had already gone so far over budget. You see, the Concorde is actually one of the most famous examples for a psychological phenomenon known as the escalating commitment or sunk cost fallacy. A sunk cost fallacy is a psychological effect that causes people to double down on a loss precisely because they are already so invested. It is us not stopping a movie we do not enjoy because we already watched it for half an hour and don't want to accept that this time was wasted. It is us not leaving a toxic relationship because then we would have to accept that all the energy that we already poured into this relationship was good for nothing. It is a company doubling down on a terrible investment because they don't want to accept that all the resources spent up to this point are lost. And when it comes to Mario Kart World, well, let's talk about Mario Kart World. Mario Kart World is amazing. So I've never been much of a Mario Kart person, but since the release of the game, I've honestly had trouble putting it down. The trick system is such a great addition, I'm in love with it. Lots of stages play more like a platformer than a kart racer. The stages often feature great creative and unexpected settings, like Toad's Factory, in which Mario elements are produced right beside us. The Acorn level has us race a gigantic tree, or DK Spaceport that feels as if we were racing for an actual arcade game. Many of the levels are set up in such clever ways, allowing for dozens of shortcuts, differing routes, wall riding madness, and generally a lot of crazy plays. I just really love it. Just look at this. That's a better Sonic game than 80% of modern Sonic games, and I'm all here for it. The controls feel better than ever, the skill ceiling is a lot higher than ever before, but the game remains as approachable as it always has been. The items feel the most balanced ever to me, the courses are great, the game feel is fantastic, the AI racers are clever, the new knockout mode slaps. It's just, racing through the different courses has just been peak Mario Kart for me. However, there is one aspect of the game that I found disappointing, and that aspect is Mario Kart World's actual world. The very thing that this video is about. Because in my opinion, the open world in the game is not only a bit of a letdown, but actually something that is actively pulling the otherwise great game down. In my opinion, Mario Kart World's open world was a mistake. So why do I think that this is the case? Well, I'm glad you're asking, because this is the very thing that this very video is all about. In this video, we're going to take a look at what the open world actually is, how it changes the game, why I believe that it is a letdown, and most importantly of all, why I believe that the game would have been even better without it. We got quite a video to race through today. Before we start, just one more thing. This video is going to spoil the entirety of Mario Kart World. Yeah, no, whatever. It's a Mario Kart game. My name is Ceave, you're watching Ceave Perspective, a place that hopes to give interesting perspectives on great games. This is Mario Kart World's open world. Alrighty, right. We quickly have to establish a bit of fluff so that everyone watching is on the same page before we get into the meat of this argument. If you're just here for all the drama, then there is a timestamp, fittingly named drama timestamp, in the description. Awesome. In 1997, Diddy Kong Racing was released onto the Nintendo 64. Diddy Kong Racing was developed by Rare, the studio that would eventually develop Donkey Kong 64, and it was released to widespread acclaim. And I agree, it's a really good game in my opinion. It holds up quite well even today, but that's not why we're talking about it. The reason why I bring it up is another one. You see, Diddy Kong Racing shares something in common with Mario Kart World. Both games feature an open overworld in which the different courses are contextualized. But while both games feature an open world, they are as different as open worlds can be. In Diddy Kong Racing, the world slowly opens up step by step while we play. We first have to win races on the different courses to unlock golden balloons. Those golden balloons are then used to unlock more courses until we eventually face a boss battle. The open world in Diddy Kong Racing is pretty much used as a story mode that gives all the different races some context. And personally, I really enjoy this. I always really liked Diddy Kong Racing story mode, having an open world in which the races are placed and having to win the races to progress through the game always made the single player mode feel really special. So Diddy Kong Racing uses its overworld as a set dressing for its story. What does Mario Kart World use its open world for? And the answer is, they use it for the complete opposite. Mario Kart World doesn't even have a single player story mode. All that there is to do in the open world is to drive around, to beat small P-switch challenges and to look for hidden collectibles like the Peach coins. Even stranger, there isn't even a real overview that tracks those P-switch challenges or the Peach coins, making it almost impossible to find them all without the help of a third-party site. Just think about that for a second. They created this gigantic open world, and then they did almost nothing with it. All that there is are a couple of small challenges and collectibles. It is as if they designed Breath of the Wild's world, but then only put Korok seeds into it and released the game like that. Exploring the open world is obviously just meant to be a gimmick, not the main objective of the game, which, is really weird. They created this gigantic world, they filled it with so many assets and secrets and things to find and whatnot. They created changes between the biomes, managed to fit all the races into the world in a logical way. They crafted music and sound effects for all the areas, created hundreds of textures and models for it, and then they made the baffling decision to not do anything major with the world. Not even the cards, the unlockable racers, or the costumes are unlocked by interacting with the world. Cards are unlocked by collecting coins while racing, skins are unlocked by a stunningly clumsy food eating system, and drivers by an even weirder RNG-based system focused around a rare Kamek item. All of those things would have been perfect things to hand out as a reward for open world exploration, yet they decided to go with the strange system that are completely independent of the open world instead. Or in other words, there is no system in place that really rewards solo play in the open world, and the little content that there is lacks an incentive for us to engage with it. There is just no system in place that pulls us into the open world, which kind of raises a question, doesn't it? Why did they design the world in the first place? Why did they create this gigantic world if it was not for single player gameplay? And the answer? Well, the answer is that they used the entire world as racing tracks, of course. You see, Mario Kart World features two new game modes that are completely centered around the open world. Two game modes that make use of the open world in really unique ways. It's those two game modes that they built the entire world for. We have to talk about those two new modes. But before we do so, we actually quickly have to chat about something else. There's a famous strategy in Mario Kart that is probably as old as the series itself, a strategy called bagging. So what is bagging? Well, the thing is the following. Mario Kart's item distribution famously heavily favors the racers that are behind, and everyone's favorite shell, the blue shell, famously gives the person racing first an explosive disadvantage. The item system is a built-in rubber banding system. People that are behind get powerful items which help them get back closer to the lead, and the people in front get worse and worse items. They're driving where a blue shell regularly blows them up, slowing down the front drivers and pulling them back to the center. There is a force that on the one side pulls people in the lead back and the people behind forward, like, a rubber band, a force pulling everything back to the center. Alright, so an item rubber band. But what about the bagging again? Well, bagging is a strategy that tries to abuse the rubber banding to win the race. The idea is basically to pick up two very powerful items early on in the race and then to, well, bag them. We just keep them for most of the race. The idea is to then deliberately drive a bit worse than we're theoretically capable of to make sure that we don't get into a position where the rubber band begins to pull us back, to wait until the final round of the race and only then to pull out our powerful bagged items. The idea is to manipulate the rubber band to help us win during the last lap. That's just a strategy that has been viable to some degree in every Mario Kart game up until today. It is just baked into the DNA of the series. Cool. So bagging it is. But why are we waffling about it? Well, because the two new game modes that are centered around the open world both have really interesting effects on the bagging strategy. So first, the Knockout Tour. During the Knockout Tour, racers race on many different roads throughout the entire open world. The twist? Well, in regular intervals, there is a checkpoint that eliminates the last 4 players. So, as the race progresses, the last players get regularly eliminated until only the first 4 players remain and are racing for the win. What has this to do with bagging? Well, bagging is pretty much impossible in this game mode. The fact that the bottom players regularly are eliminated means that it's a pretty bad idea to deliberately drive worse to get better items. It might still be a good idea to grab a powerful item early and to keep it for a bit, but bagging it till the very end of the race just doesn't work. Since bagging isn't really a dominant strategy in Knockout Tour, this game mode gives the races a new dynamic that flips the usual Mario Kart meta. And that game mode, well, it turned out great. Pretty much everyone seems to love it, and I very much have to agree. Knockout Tour, best tour. But what about the other new game mode, the Grand Prix, and what about Grand Prix bagging? Well, the Grand Prix mode is the super very opposite of the Knockout Tour. The Grand Prix mode is bagging paradise. It's bagging heaven. Grand Prix turned the bagging up to bag 1000. But one bag after the other. So how does the Grand Prix mode work? Well, this mode is centered around the traditional Mario Kart stages that are spread over the map, but with a twist. Instead of racing the traditional 3-lap races on them, the races instead start in the open world, and the first 2/3 of the race is about us racing towards the stages. Once we reach the actual Mario Kart course, we drive through it for one single final round, and then the race ends and we drive towards the next stage. So 2/3 of the race take place in the open world and only the final third is played in an actual level. Okay, but what has this to do with the bagging? I hear you bag. Well, stay with me for a bagment, because the problem is the following. All stages in the open world are connected. Those connection roads are the places where the majority of the Grand Prix races take place. There are over 100 of those connection routes between the different stages, which is an insane number. And this very thing has a direct impact on how those routes are designed. So first, since those tracks have to cover a lot of distance in the physical open world, they all feature tons of linear driving sections and very few turns. Second, the fact that there are over 100 of those means that it wasn't possible for Nintendo to develop unique gimmicks for each and every single one of them, meaning that a lot of them are just less interesting to drive through than normal Mario Kart levels are. And to make matters even worse, all of those connections are not just a single race, but 2, because they connect the stages in both ways, meaning that it has to be possible to drive on them in both ways, which prevents Nintendo from messing around with verticality and heavily limits design space in general. And the result? Well, the end result are linear tracks with very few unique gimmicks and barely any verticality. Or in other words, the result is a bit boring. There are some standout routes, but most of them are just a bit, lame. There isn't much to do in them. And this is where the bagging begs for attention again. The linear intermission courses allow for much less skill expression than normal Mario Kart races do, meaning that the races most of the time get decided during the final lap, the one lap we actually drive on a real stage, which obviously heavily encourages bagging, even more than Mario Kart usually does. And thus a competitive race on one of those tracks usually looks something like the following. Everyone tries to get 2 powerful items on the long linear track while driving towards the actual stage, with no one really wanting to take the lead. As soon as we reach the actual stage, everyone pulls out their bagged items, and then the race is decided by chaos and catastrophe, which, while fun for a couple of runs, gets old quickly. Many people, including myself, just got tired of this game mode after playing through it a couple of times. And with this, it is probably finally time to let the fuzzy out of the bag. Because, as many of you already know, Nintendo recently made a very baffling decision. A very baffling decision that alienated a lot of players, including myself. Honestly, probably the most baffling and aggressive decision in recent Nintendo history. A decision that is the very reason for this very video. A decision regarding the intermission races. Here's the thing that has us fanboys sharpening our pitchforks and lighting up our fire flowers. When playing Mario Kart Online, we get to vote about the next stage after each race. The game gives us 3 different choices. We can pick one of 3 courses that connect to the current course. Those 3 options are almost always intermission races, where we race to a stage and then only play 1 lap there. So as we just waffled about, most people in the community quickly got bored of the long linear races that are exceptionally susceptible to bagging and item RNG. Luckily, however, there is another option present during online play, and this other option is to pick a course at random. If we choose a random track, then the course that is randomly picked always ends up being a 3 lap race. So we have a choice between one of 3 intermission races, or we choose to pick a completely new random 3 lap race. And for obvious reasons, soon after launch, most people ended up picking the random option, because it guaranteed a 3 course race, the game mode which most people preferred. Which brings us to Nintendo's baffling decision, because in patch 1.1.2, they changed how the random function works. Instead of picking an entirely new 3 lap race, it now picks one of the 3 intermission courses at random. Or in other words, Nintendo patched out the only option that guaranteed a 3 lap race in online play, effectively forcing 90% of races in the online mode to be intermission races. The very intermission races that people already were tired of only a couple of weeks after release. The result? Well, the result is blue shells being fired towards Nintendo at alarming rates. A huge part of the community absolutely hates this change, myself included. The huge problem is the following: there is no equivalent to the VS mode for online play. While there are 3 ways to play the game offline, the knockout mode, the VS mode and the Grand Prix, there are only 2 of those game modes present online. The knockout tour, which everyone agrees is great, and the online mode that we just talked about. The mode that now, after the new change, resembles the Grand Prix the most. There is just no game mode online that allows us to play normal Mario Kart races anymore. Just think about this for a second. Nintendo literally patched the option to play normal Mario Kart out of Mario Kart. They removed the core mode of the series in a freaking patch. To make matters even worse, Mario Kart is a game series that most of the time only gets a single release per console generation, meaning that we're looking at the very real possibility that it won't be possible to play a normal Mario Kart race online for the next decade, which, understandably alienated a lot of people, to put it mildly. Just to be clear here, the problem isn't necessarily the patch itself. If the game mode is intended to be the game mode that features the intermission races, then it makes sense to fix the random option to ensure that people mainly play intermission tracks there. The real problem is that the normal VS mode is lacking an online equivalent. The game is simply missing a traditional game mode during online play. Which raises a question, doesn't it? Why in all the fuzzy's names would Nintendo ever decide to patch out the only way to play Mario Kart out of Mario Kart? Why would they ever do this? What is going on here? Well, I'm glad you're asking. Most of the time, when we talk about a game's budget, we talk about it in monetary terms. We usually think that the budget of a game is the amount of money that it costs to produce it. And that's obviously the correct way to think about a game's budget. But it's not the only way to think about a game's budget. You see, the by far most expensive part of game development is human labor. It is work hours. So a game's budget is not only the money it costs, but it is also the work hours that were spent producing it. A game not only costs an amount of money that eventually runs out, it is also made using a limited amount of work hours. In a certain way, those work hours are also a game's budget. And how this work hour budget is spent is actually one of the most important things in game development. You see, every feature in a game comes at a cost. Every feature costs a certain amount of work hours. Every hour that was spent working on a specific feature in a game is an hour that wasn't spent working on something else. If a game has an additional multiplayer mode, then every hour that went into producing the multiplayer mode was not spent on the single player experience. If a survival game has a great combat system with lots of nuance and depth, then the time it took to develop this system is missing somewhere else. And if a game features dozens of minigames, tons of bosses, 5 main characters, and thousands of collectibles, well, then it is Donkey Kong 64, and you can probably punch through walls. The point here is that every feature that makes it into a game always comes at a cost. The time that was spent developing one feature was not spent developing another one. And not every feature is as expensive as others. Adding a couple of nice-to-have accessibility options is probably very cheap. Adding online to an otherwise single-player game is probably extremely expensive, and so on. I honestly think one of the most important skills as a developer in charge of a game is to realistically understand how much a certain feature is going to cost the game, and then to make the right calls when it comes to the question of what features and systems are the most important for a specific game. The original Dark Souls, for example, is a great example for a game that very wisely used the limited production hours for features that are essential to the experience, without adding much fluff. Hollow Knight is another example. Both of those games excel at what they set out to do and barely do anything else. Which brings us back to Mario Kart World, and the reason why I bring up the cost of features. Here's the thing. Right before the release of Mario Kart World, Nintendo published a long interview with pretty much the entire lead of Mario Kart World's production team. They're chatting with the game's producer, its lead programmer, the art director, the planning team lead, and the lead of the music team. And the interview is really remarkable, at least in my humble opinion, because if we read it closely and keep the idea of the cost of features in mind, then we can see a reoccurring theme throughout the entire interview. For example, at the beginning, Yabuki, the game's producer, says, "I felt that in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, we were able to perfect the formula that we'd been following in the series up to that point, where players race on individual courses. That's why this time we wanted the gameplay to involve players driving around a large world." And shortly after he says, rather than taking the approach of simply increasing the amount of content and adding more variations, such as the number of courses, we wanted to completely change the concept and make it playable in a larger world. A bit later, Ishikawa, the art director, says the following: "When I heard the concept, my excitement won out against my expectations of how challenging it would be. In a way, that was when all our troubles began." And then they talk a lot about how difficult it was for them to create a seamless world, how proud they are of the end result, and how the open world influenced a lot of their design decisions. Asahi, the game's sound lead, talks about how difficult it was for them to find a way for all the course themes to loop into each other, since previously they just had to compose one track per course. Yabuki mentions how they decided to increase the number of racers from 12 to 24, because otherwise the long routes in the open world sometimes felt too empty. They talk about how they decided which courses to include in the game by thinking about which courses would make sense in which climate zone of the map, and how they had to be careful that it was possible to fit the courses seamlessly into the world. They talk about how challenging it was to have dynamic light effects as well as weather effects in the stages, because those meant that all the places on the map had to look good in tons of different lighting conditions, a task so daunting they were on the brink of giving up. They talk about how difficult it was to turn the long, mostly linear intersection courses into fun gameplay bits, and how the trick system evolved by them looking for something that people could do during those intermissions. Yabuki mentions how the open world drastically increased the amount of visual design, programming and sound design that they had to do. They talk about how they designed the world around landmarks, since they wanted to avoid arrows to guide the players to points of interest. How they struggled to make it clear to the player where to drive in a course, since the roads often have crossroads and whatnot. And in the end, they ask every single one of them if there is something that they want to say to the people that are about to play the game. Here's how Ishikawa answered. As a designer, I started this project wondering, can we really make all of this? In previous Mario Kart games, the courses were separated and could only be viewed one by one, but now they look different depending on the angle, time of day and mode you're playing. We've packed a lot of details into them. In fact, even for a single road sign, there is a relationship between that sign and another sign a little further away. Lots of elements went into creating a continuous world, so we hope you'll enjoy taking a breather between races and partake in some free roam to discover new things. So why do I bring up this interview, one might ask? Well, because throughout the interview, there's just a running theme, isn't there? And that is how much time and energy they poured into the open world. From figuring out how to make day and night cycles, or how much more programming and art they had to create, to how they struggled to connect the different songs. In other words, the open world was probably an insanely expensive feature. I personally guesstimate that they probably put a lot more hours into the open world than they put into the actual courses. And they probably also had to put more hours into the courses themselves than usual, since all of them had to fit into the open world. And now that the game is finally released and we all got our hands on it, I just can't help myself but wonder if the insanely high cost of the open world was worth it. Don't get me wrong, I like the open world. It's full of love and detail, and the connection segments aren't terrible. They are just nowhere near as good as the actual stages. The 30 actual courses are the meat of the game. But since they chose not to use the open world for any kind of single player experience like Diddy Kong Racing did, the main thing that the open world ended up adding is over 100 linear intermission tracks that just aren't that exciting. In the end, the open world is just a gimmick. The only real thing of substance that the open world added is the knockout tour, and this is where feature cost once again comes back into the picture. You see, if they just wanted to add a new knockout tour mode, then they would probably have been able to come up with something similar, maybe even with something better if they had only spent their energy into this new game mode, but it would have been a far cheaper feature to develop. And because of all of this, I personally think the open world was a mistake. You see, I don't necessarily think that the open world itself is bad, quite the opposite. Given how weird the whole premise is, I honestly think they knocked it out of the park. But if we take into consideration how costly it was to add this world to Mario Kart, how many hours it took them to craft the whole thing, and how, well, mediocre the actual races in the open world ended up being, then I just think the whole thing was not worth it. In my humblest of opinions, Mario Kart World is a fantastic Mario Kart game, but it is a fantastic Mario Kart despite the open world, not because of it. I honestly wonder what the team would have been capable of if they had instead used their energy to create more stages, to flesh out the less impressive races that made it into the game, and to come up with new game modes. As for the online, so at the beginning of the video, we talked about the financial disaster that the development of the Concorde ended up being, and how we often struggle in various situations to pull the plug on a bad idea once we were head over heels committed to it. Since most of you smart little viewers know what a framing device is, you probably already connected the dots, but for the sake of completeness. Well, now that the game is out, Nintendo sees the user data. They now learn how people are actually engaging with the huge open world they just spent so many resources crafting. And the thing that they're seeing is probably not what they were expecting. Most people are probably mainly racing on the 30 tracks and only rarely venture out into the world. And online, most people were choosing the random track option, meaning that most online races were taking place completely independently of the open world. They spent so much time and energy and resources into crafting this open world, and now people are simply playing Mario Kart World as if it merely was a sequel to Mario Kart 8. They just crafted this insanely costly world. Wouldn't it be a shame if the players now did not race on it? Or in other words, I wonder if Mario Kart's open world is Nintendo's Concorde, if they're stuck in a sunk cost fallacy. I wonder if they just spent so many resources creating the open world, only to learn that all the players really want is to race free lap races, and if this causes them the feeling of needing to double down on the world that they had created. I have nothing to back this up, of course, but I personally suspect that this might be the origin story of the little drama that we currently have at our hands. So where to go from here? Well, honestly, it's actually surprisingly simple for once. All that they have to do is set a third online game mode that is about free lap races and call it a day. That's really everything. Mario Kart World ended up being a fantastic game. Racing through the various tracks, especially the new ones, is just a blast. The game turned out great. It just didn't turn out great for the reasons that the devs were probably hoping for. But you know, that's a good problem to have, because it's actually a problem with a simple solution for once. So Nintendo, all that you have to do is to patch a Mario Kart mode into your Mario Kart game, and all the complaining magically goes away. I know you aren't like the flexible type when it comes to those sorts of things, but come on, you got this in you. For once, I believe in you. Can we please just have free lab races again? I really can't believe I have to say this. The whole situation is just beyond absurd, but Nintendo, I beg you, could you please patch back a Mario Kart mode into your new Mario Kart? Because we all would love to play some Mario Kart in that cool new Mario Kart that you got there. We all really like the game. We just would like to, actually play it. That would be super duper fuzzy great. Hooray, what a mess. So here we have it, my thoughts on the online fiasco, why I believe the open world is cool but ultimately not worth it, and how I suspect Nintendo is escalating a commitment into absurdity. Before we wrap this up, as always, a huge and gigantic thank you to all my wonderful patrons whose names are currently scrolling by. Those people are making videos like this one possible, and I can't thank them enough for it. Second, I actually didn't plan to make a video about this. I was actually in the middle of recording a really fun challenge run in Mario Kart World and was super looking forward to sharing this little adventure with all of you over on the gaming channel. But, sometimes you wake up in the morning and Nintendo did just something so stunningly dumb that even a challenge run has to wait. My time plan is now a bit messy. No idea if we will first talk about Bonanza or about the challenge run. But hey, at least I got more time to work on videos, now that Nintendo killed all my desire to play Mario Kart Online. Always looking on the bright side of life. Awesome! So if you liked this little video, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up. If you're interested in more discussions about interesting aspects of great games, subscribing might be a good idea. And if you really loved the video and want to have content like this survive on the platform, then there's also the option to support the channel via Patreon. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, lots of hugs.